Welcome to Golf Industry Guru and the Gig Podcast, where we interview the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. On today's episode, you will learn some proven real-world solutions that'll help you and your team solve some of your biggest golf business challenges. So stick around for some tips, tools, and training to get you, your people, and your business powered on. Here's your host, James Cronk.
Well, hello, Gig Nation, and welcome to another Golf Industry Guru podcast. It is your host, James Cronk, and I am thrilled and excited to be talking to an individual that I had the pleasure of listening to last summer at a club here in Vancouver, British Columbia, when this gentleman came and gave a session that what I loved about it was that it's not something that we talk about enough. It is an area that you never know you need until you need it. And then when you need it, you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish I went to a seminar and I listened to some suggestions and some recommendations. Man, I wish I had some notes on what I'm supposed to do in this situation. But by then, ladies and gentlemen, it's too late. And so luckily for us, we are going to prepare ourselves with what I consider to be a gentleman that in my research tells me is one of the best in the business. Joining our podcast today, all the way from Florida, Jupiter, Florida, in fact, Mr. Corey Saban. Corey, welcome to the Gig Podcast.
Great to be with you, James, and it's great to see you again, after meeting you in Vancouver last year.
Yeah, well, it was, I don't know, did you get a chance to play golf that day? I remember we had a beautiful day, and we had a round of golf. I don't know if I have my record round. I don't think so. I might have played in 4 hours, but that was about it. But did you get a chance to play golf that day?
I did not that day, but went up to Whistler and played up there and absolutely loved it. Stunning.
And was that your first time in Vancouver by chance?
It was not. No, I love Vancouver. I'm a big fan of your city.
Yeah, it's a great spot. So, Corey, you gave a presentation about all kinds of topics, but one of the things that I love that you did, you brought some people up from the audience, and then as a reporter, which you are, an Emmy-winning reporter, an award-winning journalist, I'm going to get you to tell your story in a second. But what I loved about it was that you gave real-life examples of real situations that happen in the club world, and I was floored. I was shocked. It was fascinating to see you summarize things. It was fascinating to hear you talk about best practices when dealing in crisis situations, in dealing with the media, in dealing with messaging, in just dealing with hostile crowds. If you're in the club business long enough, you will eventually be at an AGM or somewhere else and deal with the crowd that might not be all your friends. And I just thought that you had so many wonderful takeaways for the audience. But before we get into that, Corey, share with our audience, if you don't mind, a little bit about your background, a little bit about what CS Media Works focuses on. And I know you spend a lot of time in the club business.
Yeah, you got it, James. CS Media Works focuses on working with leadership at clubs on communication. If you think about it, most leaders are hyper-focused on golf and hopefully more on F&B, but they have challenges with conflict resolution, communicating to the members about a capital project, making sure they're getting the right touches out there to ensure that their project passes without a challenge. And then, God forbid, there's a situation where someone's harassed, there's an accidental death, or something happens that's a crisis. They are not prepared. And the first thing they're going to do is fail to communicate with their membership, which then peanuts lead to elephants, the gossip starts. It eventually gets out to the media, and then what happens? The first inclination is the person will say, no comment. Right away, when we hear no comment, we assume guilt. The other approach they'll take is they bury their head in the sand. And as you know, James, when you bury your head in the sand, there's a certain part of your body that's sticking out. And that's what they end up looking like. They need to understand that time is not on your side. So I spent 15 years as a broadcaster, and I worked predominantly in the club space, working with GMs and their teams on 3 different things: crisis management and putting a plan in place so that when it does happen, they have holding statements, that they're prepared to address it, and they can get the message out and control the narrative without it slipping through cracks. Communication and marketing plans, helping them discern the messages to the members in a compelling way, as opposed to say we're getting 6 new pickleball courts and the assessment will be $5,000 a person. Great, but where's the story? The lifestyle you love is about to get better at XYZ Club. Pickleball is the fastest growing sport, so we're adding more courts to make it easier for you to play and access this wonderful game. The cost will be, and then you break it down by monthly. But it's all about storytelling. So the other aspect I focus on is storytelling, working with clubs to make sure that their boards, the leadership, the executive team, know their story and then trickling it down. Part of that storytelling is public speaking and making sure you can deliver that message concisely, cohesively, and more importantly, deliver the connection to your members. That's active listening, using your hands correctly, your eyes, etc. Then the last part, which ties in the crisis, is culture. Your biggest crisis right now for GMs and leaders is finding talent. And so people don't jump for another 50 cents a dollar. It's create the culture where you're changing the perception outside the gates, where as a team, you're working together to decide what you want to volunteer at each month. What that does is it shows you and your colleagues in a different environment doing something collectively, whether it's at an animal shelter, whether it's doing something with schools, whatever it may be, strengthening that bond. And then as the leader, you are there with them outside of the normal confounds so they can get a sense for who you are. So those are the areas I focus on, and clubs that I work with, thankfully, have seen success and have been prepared for the inevitable. But typically what I'll hear, James, is I'm sure you saw in the session that day is, oh, I don't need this. And then sure enough, like a few months later, they're calling and to your point saying, well, geez, I wish I took some notes because I saw how easy that was manipulated.
Well, Corey, you gave so many great examples of real world situations, real club situations that had happened in the past. And I think just simply using headlines from the papers. In fact, I borrowed that, by the way, when I was doing a safety culture demonstration at a conference a couple months ago, because it was such an eye-catching visual. But and Corey, I mean, I've been in the club business for 30 years, and yes, I have had a need every once in a while to find a PR support person, a crisis management person. But in your experience, what percentage of clubs would you guess are kind of prepared in advance for kind of a crisis? Before we get into getting pickleball through at the AGM, I just want to focus first on the most dangerous element, which is, like you said, when all of a sudden a reporter calls up and says, we just heard on Facebook that Susie, the beverage cart girl, was accosted by some golfers yesterday. And, what do you have to say about that? How many, what would you guess is that the number of clubs that are ready for the types of crises that happen in our industry?
I love that question because I'll speak at the World Conference for CMAA. I'll teach a BMI class and I'll speak at different chapters. And I always ask that question, and the average is 1 or 2 hands go up. So I would say it's less than 10%. And then those that have the crisis plan, from what I've seen that they've shared with me, what does it address? Natural disaster, earthquake, hurricane, lightning strike, maybe an OSHA type issue, but it doesn't get into the food poisoning, the theft, the brawl on the golf course, the accidental death, the murder, the shooting, the drugs, the harassment, everything else that you can imagine or cannot imagine, which is why when I do the presentation, I show headlines and say, hey, you don't think it's going to happen? Here's what's going on with your peers: embezzlement, fraud, theft, prostitution, etc. So what are you going to do? Because eventually it's going to get out. But it's sad that they often don't think of that until it's too late.
Corey, what, from a crisis management standpoint, and once again, when you talk about, you get the phone call right? You get a phone call, you get an inquiry, an incident happens, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is now going to go beyond these four walls, and I'm not going to be able to contain this. What are some best practices that a manager, needs to have in their toolbox, that in advance of something happening?
So right away, in advance of something happening, is one of the things that I do when I'm working with clubs is I build a crisis team. And that crisis team is typically the AGM. It's another influential person at the club on management, as well as the marketing person, and then a fourth person who plays a backup role. And that could be any other leader on the executive team. First thing we do is we anticipate everything that could happen, because geographically there's different situations. Maybe you've got a men's dining room and a woman is upset that she can't get in there. That's something that's happened. Maybe there's an invasive species eating your plants. That's something that has happened. And it's anticipating everything that could happen, then mapping out holding statements. Holding statements are devised to make sure that when a situation happens, whether it's a legal action, a drowning, anything that I highlighted previously, that you can send those off to the reporter and they work instead of no comment. Then it's training the team how to handle the interviews, how to not fall for baiting questions. For example, if I were to say to you, one of the big issues during COVID was masks. And you had to wear masks. Well, in some states, governors were against those. So you could say to people, GMs, why do you make your employees wear masks? Well, we follow the CDC guidelines. Great. We got a call from Susie, says doesn't want to wear masks and the governor's against them. Do you agree with our governor, yes or no? So right away, they're going to say, well, no, we're following the CDC guidelines. So you're saying our governor is wrong? Or yes, I agree with our governor. So then why are you following the CDC guidelines? So they fall for things like that, which is a baiting question. The correct answer is the governor and I want the same thing, the safety of all blank, and moving from there. Hypotheticals, another one. James, hypothetically, you knew that was going to happen. What would you have done? Hypothetically, you knew this person was on your course and felt that way about this and was racist. What would you have done? And you're going to answer yes or no and tell a story, but the answer is, hey, listen, we don't deal in hypotheticals. We deal in facts, X, Y, Z. So I train them to be aware of those baiting questions, how to use their hands and their body language, not to sit like with their arms crossed, because right away it'll assume guilt, and to control the narrative. Then, to your point, when something happens, that team gets into action. The membership marketing person is responsible for all communication. He or she is writing up messages for the staff that get trickled down. They're reminded that they only speak with one voice, that we have a protocol, and they're asked not to comment. And the members get that same message, because as a reporter, what you're going to do is call the GM, and if they say no comment, you're going to go online and look to see who works at that facility on social media. You'll stand outside their gates with a microphone. You'll use the property appraiser's report to get in. Whatever it is, you will find a way into that club. So the idea is to have that plan in place, speak with one voice, be ready to tackle the issue, because time is not on your side. Reporters have deadlines. First thing I say is when they call, you say, hey, James, thanks for the call. It's now blank o'clock. What time works best for you, and what is your deadline? My deadline's at 5 o'clock before the news. Great. It's 3 o'clock now. Please let me know your best email, and I'll follow up with you. And then you send that holding statement, or if you decide to do the interview and it's negative, you do the interview in a place that does not have your logo, that's pretty forgettable, an empty room, outside, etc. The idea of building that relationship and not saying no comment benefits you, because maybe you're doing something for breast cancer, doing something to honor veterans, whatever it may be down the line, whatever it is, the great event you're doing that clubs often do. This then allows you to get some free media coverage by reaching out to that reporter and saying, hey, James, we met last time when we had a negative situation, but we do so much good in this community. We'd love to invite you to blank.
Well, I'm assuming that, the statement, there's no such thing as bad publicity, is not a truth statement in your world. But with regards to like relationships with the media, Corey, like, I know some managers that, their philosophy is to not the head in the sand philosophy, but just the fact that, avoid, like, and then I've also worked at places where we had media day and we tried to cultivate relationships, and, we had all of them out because we wanted them to know that we had lots of good things, so that the one day that a bad thing happened, maybe they'll give us a heads up before they put it on the front page. In your opinion, I mean, do you promote managers to cultivate that relationship, or what's your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question because it all comes down to the personality. The fact that you said you invited the media is very forward thinking. But the first inclination, and what do we believe about the news? Oh, that's fake, or I don't like this, it's too negative, so they're out to get me. You have to understand how reporters work. So what I always suggest people do is look at all of the stations in their market, whether that's TV, print, online reporters, and create a spreadsheet. What's their name? What affiliate? And then dig deep into their social media. Do they have pets? Where'd they go to school? Any kids, etc.? And have all that and then follow what they do. And you could tell what kind of journalists they are. But when they do call, you could say, gee, James, I love that, you're reaching out to us today. I know you're a big golfer, et cetera, and that your dog's name's Pugsy, whatever, and just go from there. And you could build the connection and distract and deflect a little bit because people end up liking people and they have relationships. I think it's imperative to try to use the media advantageously, but I do not encourage people to reach out to them to invite them in, unless, of course, they're doing something positive. And oftentimes when they're doing something positive, they're doing it on the down low anyway.
We'll get back to our conversation in a moment. But first, are you ready to learn from the world's greatest golf and hospitality industry leaders? Train your team and grow your business with a membership to Golf Industry Guru. Join for less than $3 per day and give your entire team access to over 150 hours of courses, podcasts, webinars, templates, articles, live Q&A calls, and more. Free content samples and registration details at golfindustryguru.com.
When someone in your presentations, or when, I'm sure at a cocktail party, someone will say to you, hey, Corey, what's the craziest thing that you've ever heard that's happened at a club? Do you have an answer for that?
I have a lot of answers for that, James. The interesting thing is often I sign agreements that doesn't allow me to share.
Of course.
But I could speak in bigger picture. So we could say someone goes in for a massage and asks for a happy ending, whether it be from a female or a male and same sex. There is a situation, politics, a lot of fights around politics and brawls that break out. Theft is a big one, particularly at wealthier clubs, which I find ironic. They'll steal whatever it is, and then the member will bring back the wrong item or something that they thought they stole and then blame it on a medication or something else, even though they had a shoplifting arrest in their past. It's a little bit of everything. Murder, obviously, is something that we've dealt with. Racism, very big. Where a property used to be a plantation, if it's in the South in the United States, and or just recently an employee claimed racism at their club in New Jersey for not getting a promotion. So it's always something. And there's a little bit of everything, and each way you handle something is very different and delicate.
Corey, just referring to yesterday, an article yesterday or maybe 2 days ago about a poor lady that got snapped up by a crocodile in her community, and the
I've
story
dealt with that too, but
yeah, and the story was simply that everybody should know, like they had named the crocodile, they fed the crocodile, they had a park bench beside the pond that the crocodile hung out in, and of course the family suing the community because the statement being they should have known. My question for you a little bit is around, for if you're a club manager, is there a threshold about when you call it a professional and when you manage it yourself? Like, how does a club manager make a decision about a situation? And, there's the obvious ones, obviously. When we're talking about harassment, when we're talking about things that can destroy a club's brand, when we're talking about, your reputation, the community, the trust and faith of your consumers. I'm sure there's all of those elements that are large, that can live on a lot longer and have more damage to your business than other things. But do you propose or recommend, or do you think that there's a threshold about when you need professional help and when you just try to manage it on your own?
Well, you hit on two key points, and often leaders don't think what you just said, and that's brand. And branding is everything. Your club is more than just a club. It's a brand, and branding your club and telling the story and knowing the story is everything. So you want to protect that brand. So first and foremost, my advice for all the leaders listening is you are a brand, know what your brand is. You're not selling on value, as one club was telling me, well, because then you're always going to be on price. But know your brand. Then it comes down to leadership. Often I'll find good leaders and bad leaders. You've seen them. The bad leaders are the first ones that are bullied by their board, and the board doesn't stay in their own lane. And yes, they did it 15 years ago when they were working for whatever large CE company they were at. But now they're retired and they're on a board, and their goal is to look towards strategic vision and map out the future of the club, not the operations. So it's imperative that today's leaders step up and say, you know what? I want to solve this problem. And what I'm going to do, if I'm not the smartest guy in the room, is bring in someone whose area of expertise is this. Much like you wouldn't do your own heart surgery, you'd call a doctor. So you would see leaders do it themselves and then fail, because it's a full-time job going back and forth in the communication. Because if you've got a reporter that's coming after you, that's all they're doing. And they're digging up dirt all day long, and it is time consuming. So your goal is to get training ahead of time, is what I always say. Get training ahead of time, have a plan in place, make sure everybody on the team knows what's going on. It's interesting because I was talking to a GM a couple of years ago, telling him, and he was like, oh, geez, that's too expensive, the training. And, I'm like, oh, I totally understand, Mike, that it's too expensive. Got it. But think about the alternative. Yeah, no, it's not for me. I can't do it. We don't have any situations. About 8 months later, he sends me an email and he reaches out about an issue that happened between one of his members and one of his staff. And I said, yeah, this is going to blow up in your face. Did you talk to this? Did you do that? Did you do this? He's like, I didn't do any of that. I'm like, you haven't done that yet? He's like, no. I said, geez, that price point I quoted you a while back is now more money because you weren't properly trained.
Right.
Well, he was like, you're 100% right. I was kicking myself, da-da-da-da-da. So it's always funny because you get a lot of PGA guys that become GMs, and you're not just going to show up on the course and play 18 holes. You're going to go to the range and hit practice balls. Well, the idea is the same. You need practice and repetition. And this is what I'm good at. But if you stick me on the golf course, I'm miserable.
Is there a good way and a bad way to say I'm sorry?
It's one of the hardest things to say is I'm sorry. But if you're married and you're like me, you wake up and say it every day. Is there a hard way to say you're sorry in an easy
wrong way?
A wrong way. Excuse me.
Because you read about this,
and mean it, and it depends what the situation is. So we don't want to say I'm sorry. We want to talk about what we did, what happened, and what we've learned from it to ensure it doesn't happen again. We had a sexual harassment issue on our campus. This is what we've learned of. We're investigating it further to find out all the details. We're also working to put more training in place amongst our staff so that they are aware of what harassment is, what to do if you see harassment, how to report it, and to be aware of each other's needs, pronouns, etc. So it's what happened? What are we doing to address it? What are we going to do to ensure it doesn't happen again? So that's your way of saying sorry. The wrong way of saying sorry is saying, wasn't me, we didn't do it, or sorry this happened, can't wait to get everything back to how it was, which a club recently did in Colorado.
I'm sorry you're offended.
Pretty much. But what happens is the biggest issue is it's always somebody internal that slips it out. When I'm writing for a club and for their membership, I always say to the board, listen, I'm writing it this way because someone on your staff is going to slip it out or someone on your board. And they say, no, not on our board. And sure enough, wow, how'd that reporter get that? No matter where it is, it's the same.
It's unbelievable. So, and that really speaks to, this kind of attraction to car crashes. And I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, Corey, and is this kind of, do you see any kind of abatement in the future with this kind of social media frenzy of negativity of, sound? I mean, it's like we could talk about all the things that's going on in the world. You say one misstep, in a public forum, whether it's an AGM or whether it's in front of Congress, and your job's over, right? The people will go to the throat as soon as they can. So let's relate that to communication skills. What are some recommendations or best practices that you give managers, leaders, standing up in front of a crowd, standing in front of an AGM, standing up in front of the media, standing up in front of their staff? What are some of those kind of best practices that you see that separate a good communicator from a poor communicator?
Their presence, how they speak, where they stand. Are they hiding behind a podium, or are they out in front of the crowd? Are they using their hands, using their eyes? Are they walking and talking? Are they using words like we and together and using the proper hand gestures, or is it I and me? Are they, going out there in social media and talking about their team or talking about themselves? The biggest problem oftentimes is someone will think they're being funny and share something on their personal Facebook page or what was Twitter, and maybe they've had a cocktail and they chime in on something, and that is a detriment to you. Stay off the social media because it follows you. It will haunt you. And to your point, one wrong word or a word that someone interprets as wrong could lead you down a path. Someone could easily say to you, what are your thoughts on the war in Gaza? Well, as soon as you give your opinion, you're done. Listen, I appreciate the question, Mr. Member, but, I'm focused on really running a first-class club and operation and member experience. I don't share my personal beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But what are they? What about this? What about that? So the idea is you've got to stand firm. And then when you're in a contentious situation, don't respond right away. Take a heartbeat, pause, mirror what the other person said so it seems like they're being heard, address them by their name, and eventually you will get to the problem without giving away everything.
Corey, I want to ask you about DEI. I want to ask you about diversification, equity and inclusion, and this is a topic that is for many, 60-year-old men or women that are running a club or whatever the age. This is a new thing for lots of people. It's not that new, but being sensitive, being aware, being inclusive. My goodness, the things that people joked about when we were 25 would ruin your career today. Rightfully so. So what is the way that you give advice and recommendations to managers to ensure that they create a welcoming, open environment for all people, so that they find a great culture, so that they have a great staff, so that they create a place where people are happy and want to go to work and want to be themselves, because that's what creates a great workplace. You have to create that culture. So how do you help people that are have not thought about that in the past to be aware of it in the present?
Well, the first thing is you have to understand the members are not your friends and the staff are not your friends. So you can't say, hey, James, that was a great shift. We did blank and use anything. They're not your friends. They're your staff. Just great job. Then understand some of the words that you said when you were younger have different meanings today. Particularly, take a word like gay. Gay, it was once happy, then it was you're so gay, meaning like dumb or silly, and now it means something completely different. Be aware. The best thing is hold your tongue. That's it. You don't need to use words. You don't need to look at people and say certain things, tell off-color jokes, etc. Think of the obvious. Do not get too comfortable. The other thing is DEI training constantly and talk about it. What are your differences? How are we alike? What can we do out in the community together to volunteer so that you're strengthening that bond? And that creates the culture. Often, you think about it with culture, people will say, geez, we're going to have a pizza party today. And the employee says, great, what toppings are they getting us now? That's not really exciting, but find out what moves people. Look at their love language, whether it's words of appreciation, acts of service, touch, gifts, whatever it may be, and try to communicate with them that way. Use personality tests to understand who they are, what moves them, where's their best role. But in regards to DEI, it's a different world. You need to embrace every culture and embrace everybody. And I'm not saying that's anything new. It's just be aware of your surroundings. Don't put it out there. Don't share jokes that are off color online with your friends because you never know what's going to get back out, what's going to haunt you.
Well, yeah, it's great. That's great advice. And what I liked what you said in the very beginning was to recognize that your intentions might be innocent all the time, but that doesn't mean that everyone that's listening will take those things in the same way. And like you said, you have a responsibility as a leader with that they're not your friends, they're not your buddies. And I say this to young managers and often golf professionals, when you go out on the town, you could be running into your next boss one day. Like how everything you do is developing your own brand. And one day your brand is going to be used to get you another job, get your promotion, get you more money or not, or all those other things, right? And so my last kind of topic for you, Corey, when you were with we could talk for hours, but my last topic that I know you can give some wonderful wisdom to is around brand, but it's that storytelling kind of aspect and that element of what creates a great story and how do you, like you said, about selling the pickleball or selling the golf simulator or, telling them, the assessment that needs to replace the irrigation system that hasn't been touched for 40 years. I mean, not every club, some clubs need assessments for a $10,000 fix and, some GMs can write that in a stroke of a check. So everyone's different, but in my opinion, everything always requires a story. So what are some best practices for storytelling in your world?
Oh, that's such a great question. Storytelling is everything. Why stories, first and foremost? Stories are how we learn. You never put your kids to bed and say there were 3 bears, one got the good bed, love you, good night. You told them a story because stories are how we learn. History is his story, the Bible, all about stories to teach us moral and valuable lessons. So when it comes to your club, to your point, it's a brand. But what is the story? What are you selling? Because everybody's selling something. A credit card is selling you that convenience of paying for it later. Insurance is selling you that, hey, we've got your back and we'll take care of you when you're dead. We'll take care of the loved ones you leave behind. Apple is selling you a phone and we see things differently. That's not the way we do things. We're cutting edge. You need to remember when it comes to your club that facts tell, stories sell. You don't want to come out and say, located on 92 acres of land, blah, blah, blah. That's not it. It's surrounded by beautiful woods and lakes and a peaceful environment. This is a place where moments become memories and your neighbors become friends, whatever it is, but you tell the story. What do stories have? They have characters. So it's developing those characters. And particularly for your website, storytelling is crucial. Put on testimonials and use members that belong there, not actors. Let them tell the story. But most people say, why do you love working at XYZ Club? Or why do you love being a member at XYZ Club? It's a great club, and they'll start laundry listing. They have golf, they have F&B, they have a fitness center, and I really love it. Well, what exactly do you love? And tell me about the people and what makes them special. So it's asking the right questions. Obviously, as a former news guy, I get the right questions to ask to get the emotion. But storytelling is paramount to your success, whether it's on the website, whether it's public speaking, it's telling a story. You know, I want to tell you about a member that we had that had a charity event, and that charity event was getting enough golf balls and golf clubs for our soldiers overseas. So what they did was blank, blank, blank. And that's why today I want you to consider donating to, as opposed to donate to. Oftentimes, leaders will come out with just the facts. Well, no, we need the whole story because that's going to captivate us and it's going to be memorable. The other thing is they get married to numbers. Numbers are not memorable. Hey, the odds of that happening are 1 in 47,000. I can't visualize that. And the majority of us are visual. So take your numbers and make them visual. The odds of that happening are 1 in 47,000 or being the only guy in Yankee Stadium. You can visual. Yeah. So that's the idea. I live in Florida. You know, they need to refurbish the beach constantly. And there's a lot of beach clubs. And they'll say, we need 1 million tons of sand to refurbish the beach. I can't visualize that. Or 50 dump trucks filled to the top. So create the visual. And that's one of the best things you can do. And there's always a way to do that.
That's awesome. Love it, Corey. So good. So good.
Here's one more for you, James. Just hit me.
Please.
Use visual words. So if I were to say, think about being on a yacht today, you thought about it. And now you're not because it's raining and all that's going on behind you. Imagine being on a yacht today. As soon as I say imagine, your brain goes there for a second.
Right.
And then it's in your cadence, how you tell the story. Speak in that one thought per sentence. I want to tell you about a situation that we had at our club. As opposed to, I want to tell you about a situation we had at our club. The slower you can speak, the more digestible it is because our attention spans are very, very short.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Corey, I want to do this again because I have 9 more questions that I never got to. So I'm going to do my best to reconnect with you. But if one of our Gig Nation wants to get your advice, I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm sure that you're open to talking to anybody about what their needs are, and you can share with them a bit more about specifically your services, your features. I know you're a great speaker, and you travel around as well, giving presentations. So I'm going to put you in my guru list of recommendations. But what's the best way, Corey, for Gig Nation to connect with you?
Well, a couple of ways. They can go on LinkedIn, and they'll see my name, Corey Saban, and shoot me a note. That's easy. Or they can go to my website, which is csmediaworks.com. CS, my initials, the word media and works.com. And just reach out, shoot me an email or fill out a content form. I love to talk to people, understand their challenge, try to give them some free advice because ideally not everything needs an expert on site. And, you know, hopefully you can navigate it yourselves. But I'm happy to talk to whomever, and I'm flattered that you had me on the show today, that you consider me an expert in this, and I'm thankful for that, and that you were able to have a dynamic conversation. Great job.
Yeah, no, thank you, Corey, very much for joining us. And, you know, lastly, I would just remind everyone, and I say this when it comes to incidents, I say this when it comes to safety, I say this when it comes to scenarios. If you're in this business long enough, chances are you're going to see it, you're going to live it, and you're going to need some help from people like Corey. So don't wait until it's too late. And Corey, thank you so much. Gig Nation, thanks for listening. And as always, we will see you again on the inside.
Thanks for listening to the Gig Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and mostly that you learned a few things that will help you improve your business. Join us next time as we continue to bring you the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. Thanks for listening.